Back with another episode of Semi-Pro. Today I've got with me Dweg. He's a caster you might have heard on little broadcasts such as ESL Pro League and IEM Katowice, of course, this year. And before that even, he was doing some bigger name events. I wanted to actually start, Dweg, by asking you about some of these larger scale events, because I do remember there was a video that you guys put together, you and Eternal J, of course, and what you guys had essentially done was like, this is our 2020. I think that was maybe even the title of the video.
Yeah.
And so it was a sort of announcement that you guys were really taking a serious push to do a bunch of events together. And I imagine that must mean you have some sort of set goals for this year, for maybe even the broad scope of the future. So could you walk us through a little bit about how Katowice and EPL as well, like how do they fit into that? Is that like ahead of schedule, or are you guys just, was that expected? Did you guys just want to continue on this path, or like what does the goal look like, and how are you guys meeting it so far?
It's funny because like Jay and I have kind of spoken about this a little bit in the past. We've got very different goals, I think, of like where this partnership goes. For me, like if I'm casting a tier 3 event or I'm casting ESL Pro League, for me, I'm doing the same job, right? Like I'm prepping the same, I'm watching demos the same, I'm casting the same. Yeah, obviously it's great to do a big name event, but for me, like my goal is to just make sure that I'm casting the best. And if those big events come with it, then like that's like the extra bonus, right? Like,
Sure.
I think for both me and Jay, like this is our full-time job, this is our living. I know that there's been certain parts probably last year, like January, February, March of 2020 was really rough. I'd sort of finished up working with Blast. I was trying to get the whole duo going with Jay, and it just seemed like there was no work happening at all. And I was getting really worried. I was having to look at like a second job, just to be like, right, like how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to pay my car insurance and things like that? So I think for me, like my goal is just to be like financially stable, you know, not have to worry about, oh shit, like March is here. We're into the player break, like, oh, there's no events going on. So for me, it's like casting the best, pretty much being like full time for the whole year, and just like having fun on broadcast. And as long as I'm having fun, then like that's all that matters for me.
So when you say casting the best, just to clarify, you're not talking about like casting the best teams or whatever. You mostly just mean casting yourself, like making sure you're putting on the best product? Okay.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Like, obviously, when you cast a tier 2 event, like, I don't know, like, I don't want to, like, name any names of being, like, tier 2, but, like, you know, Snow Suit Snow, EDCs, you know, UK Premiership, things like that. There is a very different level of caliber with the teams. Sure. Like, it's obviously very different. But for me, it's like, I'm still doing the same sort of thing. You know, I always think that, personally, I probably cast better with tier 2 teams than tier 1 teams. It depends really, because like for me in particular, like I'm casting 20 days a month, maybe sometimes even more than that. I'm casting ESL Pro League 2 best of 3s a season. So I'm not watching a team like MIBR or Cloud9 as much as I'm watching a team like Havu, Skade, K23, Dignitas, like teams like that. So for me, it's almost like a bit more of a challenge casting those bigger name events. Like I've got to do more time in the prep. I've got to make sure that I'm saying things that are correct. You know, the last thing I want to do is, oh, Alex is still the AWPer of C9. Oh, actually, no, it's Esotag. So it is things like that, yeah, you want to be watching everything and you want to be keeping up to date, but it can sometimes be really difficult because there's like 15, 20 top teams in the world in tier 1, but then there's like 100, 120 teams in tier 2. How am I supposed to keep up with all of them, of what's happening in advanced and main, and then I'm also going over? So for me, it's just always being able to deliver the best product and making sure that, like me personally, I'm doing a good job. And if the employers are happy with that and they're saying we're doing a good job, then, you know, I'm happy as well.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned there, talking about maybe you cast 2 or 3 best of 3s of top tier Counter-Strike in 1 month or in one setting. Obviously, something that changed that a little bit was IEM Katowice. And you and I talked about this a little bit more on the episode, well, I guess in the green room, so to speak, of the episode of Elo Heaven that you did. And one of the things that was mentioned was these were just very long days, right? So they're good opportunities, but it's a lot of work. It's not like, oh yeah, you've made it to the big leagues and you get all the support staff and you get everything that you need and you only cast 1 best of 3 a day. Isn't that perfect? Yeah. It's not that La La Land just yet. So considering that scenario, could you just set the stage for us and walk us through specifically one of the Katowice days, what that would look like in terms of like hours on broadcast, call time? Like what was a day in the life of Jay and Dweg during that particular experience with Katowice?
Yeah, so we were on for 3 days, I think, and we were off for 2. So we worked day 1, which like started off group stage. We had day 2 off. We had day 3 on, day 4 off, and then day 5 on. Okay. And then I think like Darth and Mike might have done like 1 extra day than us. So we were doing 3 best of 3s a day, except for the first day where we had like 3 best of 1s and then 2 best of 3s, but it's kind of the same, right?
Sure,
like you look at the map value, it's like a maximum of 9 maps per day. And for me, like I made sure that when we had Katowice coming up, that I was probably, well, the thing that's difficult, right? And this probably happens to a lot of like big name events, is that when you're running B and C stream, sometimes you don't quite know what matches you're doing, because like the mainstream will be like, oh, we fancy doing this game because X, Y, and Z. So that means for me, I've got to prep for every team. And I enjoy doing it. So I think 2 weeks before Katowice, I was watching maybe 5 to 6 demos a day. And then I was doing like some of the stats line and what have you. So come day 1, like on my days off, I didn't really have to do much because I'd done as much preparation as possible before the event. So it all just came down to making sure like the sleep pattern's the same, making sure that I'm like brushing up on some of my notes, maybe having a watch back of either day 2 live or like some of the day 1 games that were on the other stream that I missed. But yeah, like I think call time was probably about an hour before we started. And then we obviously had like the 3 best of 3s a day. And then we like wrap up with like a 5-10 minute like chat with the producer. This went well. This could have been done a little bit better. Something that I really like is like having a good relationship with like the producer, because like it's their show, obviously. Sure. And I don't want to like put words in their mouth saying, oh, this was rubbish, I think this is much better. But a lot of the time I feel like if you're quite chatty with the producer, maybe with events you keep working with and you get to know them, then they sometimes like ask you questions on days off or after the broadcast, like, do you think we should do this? And it's like, yeah, like that's a good idea, because yeah, although I'm just a caster and I'm here on a microphone, like I'm still part of the whole product of the production. So if I can have a little bit of input to make sure the stream looks better and like the whole field of view is better for the viewers, then, I'm down for that as well.
Of course, yeah. And it sort of comes hand in hand with some of the issues that did arise on some of those streams. One of the things that I was privy to a little bit earlier in that, not just in Katowice, but just in general with ESL, is that I know that they have, I forget the exact terminology for it, you might be able to refresh my memory, but they essentially have like some sort of showrunner that is supposed to be watching all the streams and sort of putting out fires where they come up. And sometimes you might be going to that guy and saying like, hey, did anything catch your eye? And he's like, sorry, man, I was handling like B stream, C stream, so I didn't even see this one. I didn't see this game. So it almost feels like even the production, those guys are overworked is maybe a strong word, but they've got a lot on their plate, we'll say. And given those scenarios, it must be almost challenging it must be nice to have that 5-minute chat, right? So that you can have some of your grievances aired, and then eventually some of the issues that are maybe detracting from the broadcast, so to speak, can actually get rectified. Was that your experience generally with Katowice? Did it sort of hold true to that side of idea where maybe it is a little bit of a slow ship to steer, but it will get there eventually?
Like it's one of those where you've got to look at this from perspective, sure. Right? Like you've got an event that's running 3 streams. It's like a $1 million event.
Yeah.
I might be quoting this wrong, but like what happens on the stream is not going to be far more important of what's happening on the mainstream. Maybe that's part of like what's important to them. Not saying that like the C stream was like handled poorly or anything, but there's priorities, and I get that. People have got different jobs. They've got to manage this, manage that. And I think for me, like obviously the observing was a bit rough for the couple of early days, and I think ESL were onto the point like really quickly. I know that there's a couple of people that I speak to on Discord, like maybe that aren't producers but are like management.
Okay.
And it's gotten to a point now that we've done so many like ESL events that like they just ask me at the end of the day, like, what do you think of this? And I'll just write like a paragraph, I'll just write like this big sheet, this was really good, maybe this could be improved on. And it seems like every time I've made one of those, I've never had the feeling that like my voice hasn't been heard. Okay. Like I've always kind of got that feeling that, yeah, we're taking it on board. Maybe it's not as easy as like, let's just flick the switch and it's done. Like I realize that. But it's important, like that 5-10 minute conversation after the broadcast, because like, I feel like out of anyone that's actually working it. Sometimes like the casters have got the most amount of input because they're the ones that are looking at, what's happening on the program, and they're the ones trying to keep up. And, we've got the producer in the ear. Okay, sponsor roles coming through. And maybe that was a bit too early. We needed to talk a little bit more about the pregame. So all things like that, get telegraphed in pretty much every event I've worked. I mean, some maybe not so much to that kind of a degree.
Sure.
But I think overall, like that seems like it's a common occurrence on like a weekly, even daily basis.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, what the thrust of that is you've got the opportunity to bend the ear of maybe a producer or somebody in management.
Yeah.
And something that is detracting to the experience can get rectified eventually. So that's obviously one way to error correct. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about is, given that, especially with these very long days at something like Katowice, if there is maybe an issue or something that you notice that is not the best coming out from you guys, specifically as the casters, you don't always have the opportunity to error correct. Like maybe you can do it on the fly if somebody notices, like, oh yeah, I'm actually kind of low energy here, I should step it up, or whatever. Like to what extent was there a challenge at any point in Katowice? Did you face that? How did you end up error correcting? If so, like, was there anything that sticks out in your memory of that event or any of the other ones that are on the longer side that you've done?
It's actually something that like Jay and I speak about quite regularly, and it doesn't matter whether it's long days or even short days.
Okay.
One thing we kind of do a little bit before broadcast that we weren't really doing before is we normally have a bit of a chat for like 5-10 minutes and kind of hype each other up a little bit. These are the games that we've got, like the whole like, boys school, like rugby sort of like prep talk, and, the old like fashion sports, that I was like, really into growing up. You have that like pep talk with the coach, and he's like, right, lads, like, let's get into it. Let's have a good game. We go over things like players' names. Sometimes you get some names. Maybe not so much the top teams, but you do get names out there that are pretty difficult. So sometimes we like run it by one another, even if we're saying it incorrectly. If we're both saying the same thing, it's better than one of us saying the wrong thing and one of us saying the right thing. And then one thing that we've got, I mean, Jay and I have got a very like good relationship in the sense that we've known each other for so long that if I'm, feeling a bit shit, or like I know that I'm not casting best, he's gonna message me, and I'll know that if he messages me, like, something's not right here.
Okay.
And there's been moments like in some of the long days too where I go like, mate, like I feel like the energy's a bit off, and we'll just send each other like a short little message like, energy's down, let's try and like bang out map 2. And he's like, yeah, no worries, I'll get a cup of coffee, I'll get a cup of tea, and we'll go in with like a fresh mindset. And I think it's got to a position now where I don't feel guilty like going up to him and being like, mate, that was a shit day, because I feel like any caster out there is not going to say every single day that broadcast was perfect. There was nothing we could have worked on. Like, there's always something. And I think that because we've known each other for so long, it doesn't feel like we're hurting each other, but instead we're trying to help each other. And sometimes, it might not come off the right way. And then, you send a message, and then maybe at the end of the day, like, mate, that was really good. Like we finished it up. Let's just, go with a fresh mindset tomorrow. So it's something that we've done for a while now. If I'm ever like casting with someone I don't really know, or like it's a substitute, maybe I'll let it slide a little bit. I know that that Scriv and I have done a little bit of like casting together when like Jay's sick or something like that.
Sure.
And I feel like for him, like I guess we're like mates kind of, and we do cast together. But like for me to be like, mate, that wasn't the best of cast from you in a best of 3. Like I feel a bit guilty in that sense. Sure. So it only works if you've got that good relationship with your co-caster, really.
One of the things that this also ties back into is just general improvement, because we're talking error correcting on the day. But if you're talking long term, looking into the future of things, like you said, there's never a point where you do a broadcast where there's absolutely nothing that could be worked on. Like something surely could be improved. Maybe it even goes down a lower level to like the scary part can be if you're trying to improve and then you realize maybe the improvement has to come from like a complete change of style or something. So we can get into all that as the interview progresses. One of the things that I want to open this subject with is that you guys do cast, like you said, 20 days a week, maybe more sometimes. There's a lot of work that you guys are doing. Do you find time to actually review the broadcast? Do you find that there's like a strategy in place to maybe like, okay, if we're casting like 5 days in a row or something, let's wait till those are all over and then look back over them after a day off? Like what's the sort of protocol there for breaking down almost a caster's demo and then figuring out like the strengths and weaknesses where you need to improve? What's that look like for you guys?
We try and do a VOD review every week. Obviously, weeks are like pretty busy, so sometimes it might be once every couple of weeks.
Sure.
And if we feel like maybe the casting's been off, we'll do it like straight away, like after a broadcast day. But it sometimes it's nicer to do it on a day off. You know, you could be a little bit more relaxed. You go in there with like, you know, a fresh mindset rather than maybe the frustration of not having the best of days or, you know, whatever. It was tech pauses. It was like an 8-hour day. You know, sometimes we just like to kick our feet up and, you know, watch a bit of TV or have some downtime after a day. You know, there's nothing worse than prepping for 3 hours before a broadcast, having a 6-hour broadcast, and then doing a VOD review after.
Yeah.
So we try and do it on our days off. I know that sometimes when we are busy, it maybe does get pushed back a little bit further than it should. But we try and do it quite regularly. We probably look at like one map at a time. Maybe we look at like a pre-game, we look at a map itself and a post-game, and there's always things you can pick. I think recently repeating phrases has been something that's crept up on both of us, and it's been an area that we've been trying to work on. I think another one has been extended pauses, where like none of us are talking for like 5-6 seconds. That's something that like we identified through a VOD review when we didn't quite identify it on broadcast, and something that we've been working on. I know that I'm currently in the process of talking with a vocal coach and trying to help things like repeating phrases, maybe trying to add vocabulary. I know that someone, for me, like doesn't have the deepest of vocabulary. You know, I read a dictionary and I read like one page. I'm like, geez, never seen this word before. So yeah, there's always things to work on, and yeah, no broadcast is ever perfect. We've had days, like without doubt, I would say quite regularly, when we go, damn, like that was good, like that felt good, energy was there. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm reading the teams poorer than others. You know, I know myself if I'm having a good game as a color. And when the days aren't quite as good, you've got to look at it and be like, okay, well then how come that day was really good and this one wasn't? Well, what do we need to identify and what do we need to fix going forward?
And that's another aspect too that you just touched on about the color side of things, where you're trying to be a good color caster, essentially an analyst on the broadcast, but you also have to be a good caster, and that's almost separate in a way. So I wanted to ask a little bit about your personal breakdown of that, in terms of, it's one thing to notice, oh, I'm you know, catching right, there aren't any of those like elongated pauses where they shouldn't be, or whatever the case may be. Like, oh yeah, I was really like articulate here, I didn't stutter, or I didn't do whatever the issue might have been in the previous broadcast. I certainly corrected that here. But then if you listen to the content as opposed to just the delivery, sometimes that can be a source of either good or bad things as well. So do you think that, because this is almost like a bit of a self-indulgent debate that I'm interested in casters giving me information on, because I think that, like, while play-by-plays, the ceiling almost of a play-by-play is like the things that you can do from that role seem to be a lot higher in terms of how you can positively impact it. It also feels like the floor is higher. So what I mean is it's easier to get to an adequate level, whereas an analyst, maybe the fans won't notice as much, but if the analyst is technically proficient at terms of casting, but has really like maybe absent-minded knowledge, or isn't like as brushed up as they should be, or they make the wrong call or something, that can actually be even worse than like a play-by-play who doesn't have all of the fluff and the bells and whistles, but at least casts adequately, so to speak, because there's different expectations essentially between the two roles. So how do you go about like breaking down the color commentator analyst role in terms of on the broadcast, and do you prize like analysis over delivery sometimes, or how do you try to marry those two, because they don't even necessarily connect together as easily as you would think? You're trying to make usually complex points in very small amounts of time.
It's tough. I think it depends a lot of the time on teams as well. Like you get, look, some of the CIS teams are like proper slow on T side. And I know Jay and I have discussed, like, depending on the teams, we can sometimes change our style a little bit. If we know that we've got, I don't know, like a Navi Junior, a K23, maybe like who else is there? Maybe a Windstrike. We know that like T sides are proper slow, so we'll try and dive a little bit more into color. Whereas if we're maybe having a look at like a quicker team, like maybe a Saw, maybe like a Dig, even Gambit can be quite quick sometimes on T side. So it depends on the team sometimes. And maybe that's like my indication to Jay, like, all right, maybe we should try and turn the style a little bit. But we've just, for me, it's all about working off one another and then at the same time, it's about me being able to have enough preparation to be reading the game. Like I almost get like disappointed sometimes when I see a strat and I call it and it doesn't happen, and it's like fuck, you know, I said something and it didn't happen. But that's at the same point kind of what I need to do is have those predictions and have the idea of what's going to happen. And you do obviously get a much better picture looking at the radar than you do in game. Like I know that in server, to be able to read a call like that from an opposition point of view is a lot tougher than it is on broadcast. But I'm just trying to focus a lot of the time, like when Jay's talking like the play-by-play, I'm just looking everywhere. I'm trying to think, okay, as soon as he stops talking, what am I going to be able to say in the next 10 to 15 seconds to give it back to him? Because there's guaranteed to be action elsewhere. It's one of those where I think that because we've had like defined roles for so long now, you kind of see it, that I can focus on my own stuff and just kind of bounce off him. I mean, there's opportunities I would say maybe happens like 2-3 rounds in a game where I'm actually doing play-by-play. Like it's just that maybe like I fucked up, he's fucked up, like I'm doing color, and then all of a sudden like a quick exie comes through, I've got to carry it on. I know that Jay sometimes does a bit of color, like if I come out of a play-by-play, and I think it's important to know that yes, you've got roles, but you don't have to stick to them, because then it gets really awkward that like I'm doing a color segment and I'm talking for like 5 seconds, then play-by-play happens. Well, it's a bit weird to kind of throw it back to Jay to start talking. I might as well keep going on. So I think it's knowing the boundaries of like when it's time to throw, when it's time not to, and then just relying on my own game and being able to try and predict and prepare for the teams the best that I can.
Is that something that you've maybe been practicing during some of your demo review streams, for example? Because I have noticed that obviously you're usually doing those solo, and when some action happens, you don't. Sometimes you'll just sit back and enjoy it, right? But other times I've actually noticed that you're like, he goes for this headshot and he gets it. I can't believe it. And it almost sounds like you're like brushing up maybe on some of those tendencies. Was that the case before, or is that even a correct thing, or was that just something that you were just reacting and feeling in the moment?
Yeah, to be fair, I haven't really thought about that. I mean, look, certainly, like when I was up and coming, like when I started, I wasn't color at all. Like I was a bit more hybrid. So I still feel like to this day, my play-by-play 2 years ago was so much better than it is today. But that's only because I don't do play-by-play anymore. Sure. And I feel like sometimes, like for a round, it's okay, but to do like a whole best of 3 is play-by-play, like I struggle. It's not easy. Like it's quick. The vocal box is just dying on me. Feeling tired as shit. And it's just because that's what I'm used to now. But yeah, I think like with the demo review streams, it just that I like, kind of feel into it. I mean, it is, I guess, somewhat important that I am like at least practicing play-by-play a little bit, because if I do get thrown in those moments, it's not like I've just got no idea what I'm talking about. Right. Like at least I can kind of throw it into that. But the demo review streams, like for me, is just a way to like keep an eye out for like the younger talent. Like I know that when I watch demos myself, I normally like use Noasis, or I normally look at like team POVs. I never look at like individuals other than when I'm on stream, pretty much. Unless there's something like huge, like I don't know, someone like Ariel and X7 who have been like banging it out on Havu. You know, maybe I'll look at a POV from them if I'm casting Havu in a couple of days' time, just to see like, all right, role change from Ents. Is there been anything different? Is there anything I need to watch out for these guys? But yeah, it's a way for me to be able to have like a little bit more of a chilled out environment when I get a bit of time to just like have a look at a POV. And I kind of look at like the up and comers rather than like your top talent. I kind of like to look at like the unknown people that a lot of people aren't following, because there's a ton of talent out in CS, and there's a lot of it that people don't even notice.
And maybe those teams or the players end up filtering up to some of those other teams, maybe. Right? And then suddenly Dweg's the resident expert here because he's actually seen all the demos. So it actually does make sense in a sort of way to keep things fresh in your mind, but also in a way to maybe almost future proof yourself, because now you can point back to examples. And it's not even illegitimate. It's not like you just downloaded all those demos when the player was announced. You actually just have some archives, right, of you watching them. So yeah, I can see that working out there. I want to switch gears a little bit here to talk about some more industry ephemeral stuff, because one of the things that obviously went down in the last couple months was there was a story that I was essentially in the center of, and this made me think a little bit in the aftermath as I was musing back on it. Like, obviously, I'm sort of trying to be a commentator unto myself, and that's not the best way to get gigs. I don't know if you know this. This is maybe not calling everybody out. It might not be the best way to get gigs, right? But they made me think of the broader topic of essentially having this opportunity or this responsibility almost to navigate the esports landscape, so to speak, without necessarily rubbing people the wrong way or burning bridges or whatever the case may be, right? Sending the wrong message. Is this something that you and Jay, or maybe just you yourself, have discussed or thought about or conceptualized as far as like something, you're privy to some information, or maybe you just hear through the rumor mill or something, and I'll speak for myself anyway, as maybe a devil's advocate, but it does feel there is some aspect of it, and maybe it's a guilty pleasure or something, but it's very nice to engage in that rumor mill stuff. At the very least, to receive the information. It's like, oh, I'm an insider now. I know some information, right? So it validates the ego in some ways. There's something going on there. I'm not 100% sure what psychologically it is, but for me, that experience can be, like I say, I know I probably should be high above that, but there is some undeniable allure to it, like almost because it's insider knowledge or something that you don't want to necessarily leak it everywhere. You want to know about it, right? It's almost like this mystery, right? And you want to know the answer. So when something like this, an opportunity or a story breaks or anything like that, is this something that you yourself have thought about? Like, what's my role in this? Do I just like keep my head down and work at it? What's the Dweg mentality when it comes to drama in the esports scene?
It's a tough one, right? And I think even saying like the wrong thing can sometimes hurt you. I think for me, I've always had the mentality of if it doesn't personally affect me, I kind of try and stay away from it. I know that like, you hear stuff and there's always like the backroom chat, right? Yeah. Like you hear from the casters, heard this from this person. It's like, really? Don't really care, to be honest. Like for me, it's like, If it's something that I've heard that's going to affect me personally, all right, then maybe I'll speak up about it. But I think for the majority of it, like I just try and focus on my own thing. I'm not really one to be like a gossip. I know that some people are like, I've got this new news. I want to kind of share it around. But for me, it's like, it's not that I don't care, but it's like it's just it's not me. Like I'm just not someone to talk shit or to gossip and spread some news that wasn't like. I always think if I'm not supposed to hear something, then I probably shouldn't hear it. Do you know what I mean? Sure, like it's one of those, like I've had conversations in the past where I've spoken to casters and it's like, the TO told me this, that you guys are being hired or you guys aren't being hired. And I get that information and I'm like, I shouldn't really have it. What am I supposed to do with this now? I'm supposed to just be upset that I'm not getting hired for an event. I'm supposed to be pleased that I heard out from you before. So I think for the majority of the like quote unquote drama stuff on all Twitter and what have you, I normally just try and like stay away from it, focus on my own thing. And maybe that's a downside, maybe not. I don't know. Like it's just always how I've been. It's like, right, if it's not for me, if it's not the info that's dressed down to me personally, then I kind of like turn a bit of a blind eye and just don't really like hear too much about it, to be honest.
And one thing that maybe helps with the whole avoiding the drama and trying to navigate away from it or just not necessarily engage with it is that you guys are pretty frequently, we keep coming back to the idea of like you guys work all the time, right? You guys, at least in this year, it's not the same thing as maybe March of the previous year, I think it was, you were mentioning at the beginning of the interview, right? So one of the things I wanted to talk about, like obviously it's a bit of a difficult subject to broach, right? But the idea is, you guys obviously are doing this for a living. This is essentially like you guys have to keep working. Otherwise, you don't want to be staring down the barrel of like a more conventional job, especially when you've gotten a taste of what it's like, right? So the question then becomes like, specifically approaching negotiations with some of these TOs can be incredibly stressful as a caster for a lot of people. And the only reason why somebody else maybe not the only reason, but one of the main reasons why somebody doesn't necessarily even try to negotiate is because they generally feel like they don't have a lot of negotiating power, or they don't even have that in their head as like, I don't know what my value is. I don't know what my worth is. And this was at the center of the Snow Sweet Snow story that I was sort of alluding to earlier. So without necessarily, I don't again know how touchy any of this stuff is, but if there was an opportunity to explain some of your negotiation style or like how you approach that, is this something where you tend to try to just take offers, or like what does that look like? Do you have like a fair price in your head, and is that something that you just try to negotiate up to or down to, or how does that sort of work for you guys, generally speaking?
Yeah, it's funny actually. Probably maybe like 2 months before the whole like Snow Sweet Snow stuff kind of like came out into the public face. I think Jay and I had a bit of a chat about like, all right, what are we doing here? Because I think we were doing the bigger events, but we almost felt like maybe sometimes our rates weren't equivalent or being pushed higher as we're doing the bigger events. So we kind of sat down to one another. I know that Jay spoke out to quite a lot of the top guys in the scene just to kind of get like a bit of a boundary of like, all right, what are we asking for? You know, what is some of the base values? And I think since then, you know, we've kind of spoken to TOs and been a little bit harder with the negotiation, sort of being like, right, this is the bottom line. You know, we won't take any more, and we've had to turn down gigs because we feel like the rates have been lower than what should be there. If you got to look at it from like a point of view where not every tournament has got a big budget.
Yes.
Even though you might think that you're a good caster, or you might think that you're worth more, sometimes the tournament value isn't quite there. The prize pool, the level of teams, you know, X, Y, and Z, it all comes into account. But I think it is important to make sure that like you're not getting skimped, right? Like if you're taking jobs of low rates in which are much lower than what you probably should be getting or what other people are getting, you know, you're not helping anybody out. So I think that's been a stepping stone for us going forward, is being able to negotiate prices. I know that I normally handle things like that. I'm normally the one that are like messaging the TOs and negotiating. I personally like to get on the phone with people. It's just kind of what I am. I know that some people prefer just like email and messages and things like that. And what normally happens is like if, let's say, a new TO is coming out or a new event and they've reached out to us or we've reached out to them and they've said, oh, yeah, we'll have you on. I'll normally sit down with Jay and I'll be like, all right, okay, this is, you know, they're offering 20 best of threes. What are we thinking? And he'll be like, all right, you know, this is X amount. Let's ask for that. You know, bottom line is this, anything lower and see you later sort of thing. And then I'll go back to the TO. I'll speak to them. And if there's maybe more room for negotiating, it's like, right, maybe I'll chat to you later. I'll go back to Jay and, you know, we have another chat, because I think one thing that we've been trying somewhat recently is like package deals. Not quite like exclusivity, but it's like, if you can guarantee me X amount of games per month, per cup going forward into the year, then we could do it for a slightly reduced rate, because we know that we've got the security of being able to get a whole year's worth of work. And I think that's something that for a lot of freelancers, maybe it's not just us. Like, I know that obviously the last 6-9 months have been really busy for us, but we can sometimes start a month and have like 5 days worth of work. And then all of a sudden, like April 2nd comes and it all comes. So getting that security is really important. And hopefully it gets to a stage where there can be more deals like that in place with TOs and companies. Like I suppose EDC is a perfect example. Like when their first event was announced, they've announced 5 seasons. So you look at that announcement, you go, okay, there's what? An event every 2 months. They've got a 5-month event. So you're looking at 10 months worth of tournaments. We know that those tournaments are happening. So yeah, it's a touchy subject. And I know it's not an easy one, right? Because you don't want to charge too much to then not get any work. And then how am I supposed to live if we're charging too much and we're not getting any work? But then if we're charging too little, then it's a difficult one. And I think it comes down to the individual casters to kind of work out themselves. I know that undercutting is like a big talking point, I suppose, and has been for a number of years now. Some people don't actually know they're undercutting. So when I speak to some of, I know that recently I've been speaking to a lot more of like the up and coming casters that are maybe doing some of the more little events, and they're sort of like, you know, what do we ask for? And I kind of sit there and I'm like, I don't know. Because when I think back to when I was up and coming, geez, like some of the rates were proper low when I was coming up. And it's like times have changed now, but then have times changed only because we're doing bigger events and we're not doing the smaller event? It's a tough one to call because you don't really know where you sit unless you kind of know yourself. It's I don't know. It's always a really weird conversation and a difficult one to master, to know exactly, I suppose.
Right, because the concern is, like you just mentioned, if you do decide to charge higher rates because you're like, well, listen, we're banging casters, like we've casted, ESL Pro League, we casted all, like surely that's got to count for something, like the vote of confidence. But sometimes even when So you referenced EDC, you referenced, like, obviously I referenced No Sweet Snow, and sometimes it's not even these smaller tier organizations that are coming at you with maybe a below market rates or below what you think is fair. Sometimes that's the top guys, right? And then you're like, well, this doesn't really make any sense. Like, I'm getting this opportunity, and then it comes down to the exposure angle, right? Almost like you're getting paid in exposure partially here.
Oh, don't even start there. Yeah.
So it's obviously like a tired trope for a lot of people, but the concern then is like it does become a legitimate factor, because even if I've been casting for X number of years, and most people who know me who watch like tier 2 CS know me, right? The question is, like, is there a legitimate opportunity for exposure that I am leaving on the table by saying, oh, you're not paying me like the high enough rate, and then you have to decide whether or not you want to take it, right? And then that can be, again, it's almost like TO driven undercutting in that sense. It's not obviously not the caster's fault, but like what do you do have to ask yourself as a maybe even a more established person, a member of talent, what do you expect like the up and comer to do? Turn down like the opportunity for this like epic event or something? Like it does seem a little bit unreasonable. So the question then becomes, like, you did mention earlier, it's a difficult thing to even get a load on, because you've got to somehow balance. You can't make everybody happy. You got to make yourself and your wallet happy. You've got to make your TO happy, and obviously those two are at odds. You've got to not make you can't take a lower rate too far lower, because then if that gets out, like, then you make all your colleagues unhappy. So like there's all sorts of different balancing acts here. So has the approach now, like, has that maybe fueled some of the, you did mention there were some changes recently where you are trying to drive your own prices up a little bit more commensurate to maybe what obviously what you think you're worth. So do you think that that's an element of a change that you can look forward to by the end of this year? Like maybe mastering that to some degree a little bit better in that sense?
Well, I don't have a Ferrari out the front, but it would be nice.
Sure,
No, like, I think it's one of those where no matter what I say for any of like the up and coming casters, it's a very different perspective.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I started out, like my first 9 months into casting, I think I earned $20. And that's like not even a joke. Like I was doing LANs. To be fair, like it was a bit different. Like the local LANs we had in Sydney were like $1,000 events, and the people that were running it was all volunteered. Like it was proper grassroots stuff. And then I started working a little bit with like eFrag, and for me, I mean, I can't even remember the rates. I mean, this is like 4 years ago now, to be honest. But it's like, how, if you look at it from a perspective of an up-and-comer, how are you supposed to be able to show how good you are at casting if you're not doing events, right? Like that's the only way. You do events, you make a show reel, you maybe, start getting a good relationship with the TO, and then they bring you up and say, oh, we're going to do, we've got a bigger event coming through. Like I think UCC is a company for many, many years now where they've brought in a lot of like up-and-coming talent. And then a lot of people have kind of gone on to other companies and to other TOs, and then maybe some bigger prize pools here and there. But you don't want to take a lower rate. But if you're not casting anything else, then what are you doing? You're just going to sit there working in a supermarket or doing casting on the side. It's one of those, it comes down to the person. And if it means that, you are taking a lower rate, but you're getting more events, then for them, it might be like, okay, this is my foot in the door. I'm going to do this for 6 months, right? And then as soon as 6 months hits, if I feel like I'm improving and I feel like I'm doing more events, then I add an extra 20 euros per best of 3, or I add an extra 45 euros as a day rate, like whatever it is, right? So it comes down to the person. I think for us, we've come to a position now where, because we're doing bigger events, I think we've got a little bit more leverage.
Sure.
It's difficult though, because we've been doing Pro League and we did DreamHack, but like when you look at it from that point of view, like, obviously the rates for those kind of events are a lot higher than the tier 2 ones are, and we're obviously really like glad to have that. But take DreamHack as an example. It was a 2-day event. Yeah, it's 2 days.
It's actually less money sometimes than a tier 2 event that goes on for longer, right?
So like when we were doing like the 9 to 5 Eden stuff, like we were doing like 45, 50 best of 3s a month. And you look at that and you go, okay, it's not as high as DreamHack, but it's 45 to 50 best of 3s.
Yeah, the money in my account's going up still, so
it's one of those where you've got to give or take. You've got to have slightly lower rates for the smaller tournaments because you're getting more money and the prize pool's lower. But you can't look at IEM Katowice and be like, right, I'm going to ask for this rate in every single event because it's a bit of a one-off, really. Okay, maybe Katowice was a bad example because we actually did quite a lot for that event. But like last season of Pro League, we did like season 12, we did 4 best of 3s. Season 13, we did 2 best of 3s. So yeah, you're doing the big events, but you're not doing a lot of it. So it's difficult to get that leverage. And negotiations can be tough. Like it's not easy. I know that some people probably feel quite pressured to ask for more. Maybe feel like, oh, they're taking so much money away from the TO. They don't have a lot. So me asking for more, it's a hard one. But I think personally, you've got to be quite firm. Like you've got to know where you're at. And if they're saying that they're not going to pay you what you think is reasonable, then sometimes it's better to turn away and say, all right, it could have been 10 best of 3, 11 best of 3 gig every month. But if it's not good enough for us, then it's better off turning away. Someone else is probably going to reach out. At least that's the way I look at it for me. For other people, it's probably very different. Like I suppose for you as well, right? Like you've done 2 seasons of EDC, but then nothing else. So I guess it is slightly different because for us, we've got to a point where we can turn work down and know that there's still work around the corner, but some people can't do that. So it's a fine line. It's definitely a fine line.
Yeah, and one of the other things too is when you are just starting out, when you're an up and coming caster, as you mentioned earlier, right? That can be very different. I want to talk a little bit about your up and coming days here in this segment because you mentioned earlier lands in Sydney with very low, $20 for 9 months. I mean, that's a bargain, right? So, so let's talk about Australia because I had Elfish Guy on a while ago as an interview subject, and one of the things that he mentioned was, if you don't, cast every single game you can in the ANZ scene, then you are going to be stuck in a very hard place. And a lot of people have moved on to Europe, or just people who are endemic to Europe will get more opportunities. Obviously, you've since done that. You've moved over to the UK now. And one of the things I was curious about is maybe what fueled that decision, and we can go into a little bit about that. So given the opportunity, is it safe to say that Elfish Guy's taken in 2020, 2021, the current year essentially, is still accurate? Was it accurate all the way back then, or were there more opportunities back in Australia?
No. Look, it was rough, right? Like I think the first event I ever casted was, first events that I ever casted was season 22 of MDL. So this is already like 14 seasons ago now. And I started out with like a bit of an agency. So I think how it all started was I attended like one of my first LAN events as a spectator, and it was like one of those like E3 expos, like very similar to something like that. And I went with all these mates from school, and I was into CS at the time, but not like into the esports side of it. And literally, we walked through the front gate. We've got like a 2-day pass or a 1-day pass, whatever it was. I go into like the first booth, and there's a CS LAN going on. It's EB Expo 2016, which is like the 4 quote-unquote best teams in Australia at the time. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, all right, I'll watch like a half, I'll watch like a map. And I just sat there the whole day. And I from that point, I was like, mate, this is what I want to do. So I reached out to Karath, who still casts a little bit for ESL. Used to like cast with Elfish Guy a lot back in the day. I know that he's not as full-time now that he was back then. And he was like, oh, send in some VOD reviews and send in, blah, blah, blah. And we'll try and, get you kind of known as such. And mate, my first cast is just awful. Just listening back to it. I think I've still got it somewhere unlisted on YouTube. Maybe it'll go public one day. So I started casting out with Aussie Gaming TV, which was a bit of like an agency. They did like the MDL stuff on their own channel. They did Cyber Gamer CGI, which is like second div AU stuff. And I mean, it was all volunteered stuff at the time. And like as well, there was a lot of casters there. I think Brainstorm is probably the maybe more known person that was a part of that company that went on to cast like IM Sydney one of the years, and to work with ESL. But for me, I felt like there was nothing there. And maybe this was on me. Like I was a part of an agency, but I didn't really know. Like you've got to remember, like at the time I'm like 15, I'm like 16. Yeah. Like I've got no idea what's going on in esports. I've got like, 24 followers on Twitter at this point. Like I've got no idea what's happening. And it was Squid actually that reached out to me. No, it wasn't. Hang on. Flakes reached out to one of my mates, Ewan, who was an up and coming caster. He was a little bit younger than me, and he was pretty solid back in the day. And he was like, "Oh, I've got cadets on this day with school or something." He's like, "Oh, my mate Josh, yeah, like he can fill in." And I was filling in for Flakes casting with Squid with eFrag TV, and this is like April 2017. And I think I brushed maybe the wrong way with the Aussie guys, because I didn't really like include them in the whole deal and everything. So maybe that was on me, but then I didn't really know, right? Like this was an opportunity that came through. I wanted to work with them. I was getting some money. And I think the AU guys, at least from the company, were kind of pissed off, because they were like, mate, we've been here for like a year and a half, 2 years now. And this kid's just come in and now he's casting European stuff. Like what the fuck's happening? Like where's our work? So I think a lot of people were pretty pissed off with me. So I was doing a little bit of eFrag stuff back in the day when they were still like up and running. I think I did a bit with like farm skins, UCC, challenger mode, all of that stuff. Did that for about a year. Now at the time, like I was still at school, so this was kind of tough. Like I know that my parents were like really against it at first, because they didn't really like see what was happening. They were like, mate, like you're just sitting there playing CS and casting and not focusing on school as much.
Sure.
Because I was, doing the European stuff. Like I was finishing school at 3:15. I was coming home, doing like an hour or two of homework. I was going to sleep, waking up at about 9 o'clock for my call time, casting until maybe 6 in the morning, going back to sleep for about an hour or so, going to school and just being so tired, so wrecked. And it wasn't really until my first LAN event that like my parents came to that were like, all right, like we kind of know what's happening. And it was like one of them like gamer cafe LAN events where it's like, I don't know, $20 entry fee, like winner takes all sort of thing. And in Oz, like you struggle to get like teams, right? Because like in the UK, like when we have like an Epic LAN or an iSeries, like you can get like 60 odd teams. But Sydney is like an 8-hour drive from Melbourne. So you're not going to get the Melbourne players coming to the Sydney LAN unless they fucking really are keen to play. So we always used to get like 8-team LANs, and it may be like, I don't know, $600 for winner, like not a lot. And I used to just help out, do a bit of casting, maybe like help out with the adminning, chat with all the players and what have you. And probably did like, I know, 3 or 4 of them. Like our quote unquote, like, rate or like payment for the day was like we always got shouted dinner at the end, so it was like, oh, we're going for like Korean barbecue after the LAN, so we get a bit of dinner. It's like, yeah, we'll take that. And I just got the feeling like after about a year, I was like, this just isn't going anywhere. Like there were multiple LANs that we had that there was like ESL employees there. I remember Kameen being like one of them. I think he might be like project manager at ESL now. And I remember like, really trying to be like, is there any room? Like, can you get me on an ESL broadcast? Because I remember like early on with Aussie Gaming TV, I think I did like season 3 of AU and NZ Champs at home. But I really wanted to try and see if I could get in with ESL. And it was always like, we've got a pretty good lineup. And to be fair, at the time they did. Like you had Elfish Guy, you had Karath, you had Brainstorm that just came through, you had Sniper, who was like the ex-immunity player. I know that Sponge was even doing a couple of events back in Oz at the time. You had like PDG, Jim Niso, like you had a lot of big names back then. So to make room for this like 16, 17-year-old caster that's not really that good, I can understand it. And then Gfinity came around. They were running their Elite Series in Oz, and I applied to be a caster. And they were like, nah, I don't think so. They were like, do you want an observing gig? And I was like, all right, I'll take it. It's not casting, but it's observing. Maybe if I do the observing, like after the first season, I could try and get in with the casting. Sure. Didn't happen. But it's observing on LAN. And this was coming up to like my 18th birthday. I just finished high school. And I was like, fuck, like I really reckon I could do something with casting, but not here. Like if I'm not getting casting work with ESL, and I'm not getting casting work with Gfinity, there's no one. Like there literally is no one in Oz other than casting European stuff online with like 0.2 megabits per speed upload. Like what the fuck am I going to do with that? Like I can't stream. So it was a bit of a no-brainer for me. It was like, right, give it a year. I'm going to go over to UK. I've got a British passport. I've got family here. If it doesn't work and I make a fool of myself, well, I'll come back home and I'll probably just do uni. And I'm just going to leave casting. But it did work, and I guess that's where I am today.
Sure, yeah. It's a nice little wrap up there too, which of course the idea is, you get the parents and they're not interested. They're like, no, just be a doctor or something. And then they come to the first land and they're like, holy shit, you must be making some money. And you're like, free dinner, man. That's what I got. So.
Yeah, pretty much. That's how it is. But I think once they actually saw what was happening, it was like that whole perspective of, oh, he's not just sitting there like playing games and not doing anything. And to be fair now, like I think at least my dad probably watches like every single broadcast that I do. Like he's proper supportive of it now. I haven't seen them for like 2.5 years, but yeah, they keep up and track with the social media and all of that. So they're proper invested now, but yeah, not so much back then.
He watches, if he watches most of the broadcasts or whatever, that must mean that he knows a lot about Counter-Strike, I bet.
To be fair, like, yes and no. Like sometimes he'll ask me questions like, oh, like how come there was no sniper on this team? And I'm like what's happening here? But no, like for him, he doesn't understand the game. Like, yeah, he watches it a lot. He listens to it rather than like watches it.
Sure.
But like he'll tell me things like, oh, I think that maybe your pitch was too high, and maybe like because for him, like, commentating is one thing, right? But whether you're commentating rugby or football or cricket, like it's all presentation. It's how you look on camera. Yeah. It's pitch, it's tone, it's speed, it's it's mumbling. It all things like that. Whether you know Counter-Strike or not, you got to pick it up if you hear it. And he actually does help me out with a lot of things, like in terms of casting. Like he'll say something and he'll like give me like a timestamp. Oh, it was round 4, and I'll go back and I'll be like, yeah, you're actually right there. Wow, so yeah.
Okay, so all right, Dad helps out there. That makes sense. What I'm interested in too is you just obviously cited a bunch of other areas where commentary is much older than it is in CS. A lot of those have like the developed style even. Obviously, you guys, the Jay and Dweg duo, have a different style than some of the top casters, some of the more up and comers, and it must be, maybe this is me reading into it too much, so you can tell me if you think so, but it must almost be like hallmark of an established duo to even have a style that you can analyze, because most of the time you are just feeling it out and almost chit-chatting perhaps, or finding a way to maybe bring the hype in the moments, but there's nothing that stands out as being like a repeated pattern, whereas you guys obviously have a little bit more going in that respect. Was there an inspiration for this style that you guys have settled on, or is this more an area where you naturally evolved into it? What do you guys make of that, generally speaking?
Well, I kind of knew. Like, obviously, I casted with Jay back in the day, and we've always been pretty good mates. But it wasn't until probably that video of like "Welcome to the 2020" or whatever it was, 2021. That it must have been.
It was 2020, I believe.
That like I knew, like out of all the casters out there, I probably wanted to cast with Jay the most, because fuck, like when you think about hype casters, like who else is there? Like I don't want to be that guy, but like he gets loud and he's quick. And I feel like he's got a very unique style that like he delivers like the real highs, where I've listened, I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but I've listened to a lot of broadcasts where I feel like it's really monotone, and I'm sitting there and I'm not excited about it. And it's not like we try and like fake hype. Like I think a lot of our hype and what have you is actually genuine. Like we love the game. We love like the big rounds and the clutches and what have you. But I think when I knew that I was partnering with Jay, it's like, right, what are our strengths here? Jay's a really hyped guy. I'm more so of a color analyst. How do we make this work? And we went through different times of trying to work together. And I think we've gotten to a point now where like we bounce off one another really easily. He brings the hype. I then kind of cool it down a little bit, do a little bit more of the color. One thing as well that I do find is that we're very different people, and I'm sure a lot of people know that. Jay's a lot more into like heavy music and things like that. Where me, I'm a lot more sporty. I'm a lot more outgoing. So we are different people, but we work together insanely well. And I think we've gotten to a point now where we're so comfortable with one another that like we just work together really well. And we have a laugh as well. Like we're both like English, I suppose. We've got English history. Like he lives in England, I live in England, and if you can't have a joke with your co-caster, I think that something's wrong there. we sometimes, we'll roast one another on broadcast. Jay might say something and I'll be like, well, what'd you say that? Like, and we'll have a bit of a laugh about it. And, we take digs at one another. And, sometimes it might be a little bit too far than what's necessary, but we still laugh at it, right? And I don't think we've ever had a moment where Jay's like, damn, that hurt me. Like, that wasn't fun at all. Like, we always have a bit of a laugh with one another. And I think that helps, that, like, it is serious, but at the same time, we can have a joke, we can have a laugh. We're both laughing together on broadcast. And I feel like we don't see that enough with the other casters. Like, one thing, I don't read Twitch chat. Like, that's my number one rule. But I've had a lot of people like message me on Twitter, be like, oh, you guys are so funny. Like, you guys really make me laugh on broadcast. And I was like, yeah, that's what we try and do.
So yeah, and obviously you have the hype taken care of because of Jay, and you obviously lean into that yourself. So you, in some ways, you get all the bases covered, and then if you can also maybe make the nothing rounds or the rounds that mean a little bit less, like the ecos and stuff, you can talk over those. You can maybe throw a joke in there or some sort of anecdote and parlay it off in that sense. So yeah, there's a value to the approach. One of the things that I wanted to ask as well is, you mentioned earlier that obviously you and Jay, you have the very different personal sides to each one of you. And even before, I think at the earlier stages of the interview, you mentioned something about, Jay having a different approach. Maybe he's got different goals or a different long-term stance than you do. So without getting too in the weeds, I wanted to ask if, every relationship, even if you're very committed and you love each other very much, there's always going to be some lover spats. There's always going to be some disagreements. Was there anything about the approach to the game where Jay, or the approach to broadcasting, where Jay himself differed in a way that, like, you guys had to spend a little bit more time figuring things out? Or was there a point where you maybe disagree with something that he was doing in that sense, that obviously related to the broadcast in this sense? Was there any sort of conflicts you guys had to maybe work through it together in that sense?
100%. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's even something to this day. Like, I think we've had moments like after broadcast where we disagree on something. We think it should be like this. I think it should be something like that. And I don't think it's ever gotten to a point where it's not been resolved. Like, there's no point having one person saying, I don't agree with this, and then the other person saying, oh, me neither, but let's not do anything about it. Like, you've got to resolve it, right? Like, yeah, we're a duo and we've been together for a while, but we have some heated arguments at times, but it's all in good faith, right? Like, it's all for the better. I think one thing that he was kind of leaning into me a bit was sometimes like me, like making these fucking like hype noises and shit like that when I'm just getting excited. And I was like, nah, that works on the broadcast. He was like, nah, it doesn't. I was like, all right. And I look back at it, and sometimes, like, even if you think, you're right, because you're always right, a different perspective is much needed. And we've always sort of been like, all right, you know what? Fuck, you're right here. Like, I'm going to work on this. You're going to work on that. And it just kind of works in that way. I think that if you're not having arguments or conflicts, then another thing is wrong, right? Because you've got two very different perspectives. I know that Jay is obviously much more play-by-play. I'm much more color. There's been some moments where I've been to Jay and be like, fuck, you've got to get me more involved in color. Like, you've got to filter me more in. And he's like, oh, but then I'm not doing the play-by-play and the play-by-play moments. And I'm like, yeah, but that's okay. Like, sometimes it's all right. And it's things like that he looks at it one way, I look at it another, and you've got to get a compromise. You've got to be able to try and figure out a way. What is the best way to do it? What is the best way going forward? And like, I think it's something that's maybe not so much regular, but it does come up, that we disagree on things, and you've got to find a way to get past it. And I think that we've been able to do so far. And I look at our progression for, the last like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and I think we are improving a lot more. Certainly being online is tough. I know that like some of the top guys, the top casters say that like they struggle online to like bounce off one another. I think that Launders was making a bit of a point that like him and Scrawny were like talking over one another. Yes. I can't remember where I was watching that or reading that. And I kind of look at that and I go, yeah, I agree to it. But I also don't. Like, I've been casting online for 4 years now, and I can't remember the last time I spoke over Jay. Like, it might happen once a week, or like, it's one of those that you've got to work with what you have. And I think that we've been able to try and do that to the best that we can.
And that leads us into another sort of subject entirely, which is almost like you said earlier, you kind of have to, if you have some criticism for one another, you have to actually like take a look and see who's right about this, or see to what degree, maybe like it's a 25-75 or 50-50 or whatever. But either way, you have to filter the critique in a way, right? And in that sense, it becomes significantly more important, I would say, to filter critique from people who you don't have as close a working relationship with.
For sure.
If some Twitch chatter or Twitter message comes in and they're like, "You guys fucking suck, I hate you guys," then obviously like that, it's not even very useful anyway, even if it was from somebody you trust. But you can't necessarily do anything with that. So, has there been a process that you guys have where you do almost answer back to your critics? Maybe not like publicly, or maybe not even directly to them, but you take what they've sent you and then you try to filter through it and see if there's anything useful, or what's your sort of policy on that respect? Has that even come up? And what I'll say is like a sort of jumping off point is, Scrawny is somebody who has a very hype mentality, right, when it comes to casting. And I know he has been harangued in the past and accused of faking the hype. And I just know from talking to him, he's just really excited about Counter-Strike. He gets excited watching like somebody else cast. So like he's obviously going to be pretty happy with with a tier 1 CS on display. Sort of, it's like a buffet for him, right? So in that sense, it's clearly not fake, but a lot of people have alleged that. So based on that, have you guys received some critique that you've had to sift through, or has it mostly been easy enough for you guys to dismiss with, or what do you think of that?
I mean, I don't know for Jay, but like for me, like if ever I get like a message and just I see straight away what the message is, I just fucking ignore it. Like to be fair, there has been some moments again with that like the woo and shit like that. Yeah. Like I was watching one of the I think one of the Katowice videos, and fuck, there were so many comments on it, and I think after that, if you get one comment that says not that this shit, but like this needs to be fixed, or this was bad. If I get it once, I'm like, all right, it doesn't really matter. But if I get it twice and I get it a third time and I get it a fourth time, I'll look at it. Like I won't take the criticism on board, but I'll look at it and I'll chat with Jay and I'll be like, all right, what do you think about it? If ever another co-caster or like another caster out there like said, you guys probably could do this, but I mean, it hasn't happened for a while. It used to happen a lot back in the day. Don't know why that's kind of stopped, whether that's because I've stopped giving feedback to other people. I don't know. But I always get the feeling that like years back, we were all like helping each other out. But I haven't had that kind of a message from someone in a while now. So you've got to know like when people are just talking shit and when like people are actually trying to be good in nature. So I take it on board, but it doesn't like affect me too much. I know that Jay, in some moments we've kind of had a chat about, he sometimes gets a bit down when he gets those kind of messages. And for me, it's like, fuck, like what do those guys know? Like if it's another caster, all right, I'll take it. I'll take it on the chin and be like, fuck, you know what, wasn't that great?
Take a look
I'll
at
work
it, right?
on it.
Yeah.
But if it's some random on the internet that's sitting there on HLTV forums and Reddit comments and on your YouTube video and shit like that, it's like, what do these guys know? Like, I don't want to be that guy, but you gotta filter it out, because you get it in the back of your mind and it's always on your mind, and you just can't let that happen.
One of the things that I want to close on, as far as considering some of the long-term plans that you guys have, obviously we touched on that as the opener. Is there some sort of, for one, an immediate plan that you guys are putting into place in terms of casting some events or pitching for some specific thing? And how does that factor into your personal long-term plan for where do you want to see yourself? Almost like the cliche question of where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself getting all the way to the top? Is that an aspiration? What do you have to say on terms of where Dweg is in a couple of years' time? Where you want that to be?
I think you got to be realistic. I've been casting for like 4 and a bit years now, and yeah, like certainly the last few months, there's been some good opportunities, but they're far and few. So I think you got to be realistic to say that you're going to cast a major fight or you're going to cast a fucking LAN or mainstream is one of those that's maybe a bit far fetched. Maybe it's not. Maybe it does happen. But for me, it's like, right, I would like to be a consistent B stream caster for the big events. Do the dream hacks on LAN, do the ESLs on LAN, do the IMs on LAN, even if it's on the studio doing the B stream. That's where I think I'd like to be, in that studio environment, really being able to deliver rather than online. And then, the few LANs here or there, maybe you're doing a mainstream, but it's a slightly lower LAN. I mean, for me, like I haven't done a lot of LANs, to be honest, because first couple of years when I was up and coming, wasn't getting anything from ESL, wasn't getting anything from GFin. And then I was having school as well. And then, transition over towards moving over to the UK, 2019, I was working with Blast for like 9 months. Then 2020, we started back up, but then that's when Corona kind of hit.
Sure.
So I think like I haven't actually like casted a big LAN. I've casted some LANs online, but in terms of like actually a LAN, like I haven't done it. So that's probably a goal for me, is to be able to like cast a decent sized LAN event. And just, try and see if progression can continue. Like, I don't want to plateau at all. Like, I think where we are now is very comfortable. We've got a lot of events coming in. It's really fun, but I want to try and take it to that next step. Try and see if we can break into the tier 1 events. It's always a tough one, right? Like, you've got so many great casters and analysts and hosts up at the top end that you almost look at that and you're like, can I really make it? I'm going to try. But is it going to happen? Maybe not. We'll see. I'm hoping that something happens. Maybe someone gets sick and you filter in there, you take their place. But you've got to be realistic, I think.
Okay, a realistic sort of outlook, and with any luck, we'll be seeing you, like you said, in those studios, on those LANs, when those indeed do come back to us.
When that happens.
Yeah. The perpetual carrot and the stick, of course. But yeah, it's been a pleasure breaking down some of the stuff that goes on inside that head and figuring out what your outlook is on a lot of these things. And certainly best of luck to all of the future events that you're going to be doing.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.